Alright, so the next phase of the rebuild was to measure the crankshaft endfloat. The spec for this is 0.006 to 0.014 inches. Essentially set the micrometer up and get it so that it deflects a little bit, and then zero it out, and then rock the crankshaft backwards and forwards, coming like it's going to go forward of the motor and back in the motor, to replicate how it would be when you press on the clutch and cause the crankshaft to move forward a little bit. Again, I'm double checking the numbers here just to make sure, and I rock it back and forth, and everything looks good. Unfortunately, I didn't zoom in enough so that you could see the values, but I ended up with about 0.007 inches if I remember correctly. And that was it. Take that off and move on to the next step. So the next step was putting in the forward block. I had already done this once before at this point in this video, and didn't do a very good job. I had to take it back apart, but that's why you see the wood already in there. Essentially, I'm using the gasket cinch stuff. There's paper gaskets that go in here. I'm getting that already. You'll see the paper gaskets kind of go in towards the end here. I have them on the bottom of the block here, if I remember right. And the wood is what provides the seal. It's pretty unique, and you notice I'm pretty gentle. Of a case in point here, this thing is made out of aluminum, and it has a problem with shearing and stripping out. The threads, part of the front end plate and everything, kind of go through this and thread into this, and it can get a little beat up over the years. So there is aftermarket steel ones that you can get. I didn't go that route because mine was in pretty good shape, but you can see the gaskets. I'm just trimming them here a little bit so that they'll fit good and don't hang over too much. Got the pair of scissors on them. Use the gaskets and stuff to as my gasket sealer choice here, and I'm putting it on again just to make sure that the adhesive is good, and then I slowly tap on the for about the fourth time here, the front sealing block. Knock that down, and it is wood, like I said, in there in between the aluminum and the block itself, so that it'll expand as it absorbs oil. It's just a screwdriver, screw tight fit, no real torque spec. Again, you don't really have to crank it down too hard. I did use brand new screws though. It was just a matter of course with my parts list. But get them snugged up, and then use a flat edge there to line it up to the front of the block and make it as flush with the front of the block as possible. Just using the hammer there to kind of help that. Then once that's good, I go in and I tighten it down back and forth, and side to side, so that it tightens down evenly and securely, and wipe up off my remaining gasket cinch stuff. And again, checking the fit, making sure that it's as flush as I can get it. Now it's a little more snug. I'll get just a little bit of movement out of it maybe. Again, checking with an angles there to make sure that it's nice and flush. You are going to put the front end plate onto that. The front end plate and part of the crank chain, or excuse me, the timing chain cover is going to screw into that, so you want to make that as flush as possible. After that, I move on to installing the rear main oil seal. This is the older Mark I type, so it uses a scroll seal. If you look at the back of the crankshaft, you can see what looks like threads or grooves cut into it. That's part of the scroll seal. In the bearing cap itself, you can kind of see the thing that I'm putting on right now. You can kind of see that there was grooves cut into that too. And essentially what this does is the crankshaft only is going to obviously turn in one direction as the motor rotates, and instead of, or excuse me, the screws and the threads tend to set up like a screw would be, and as the crankshaft rotates, oil gets trapped in between the threading of the crankshaft and the threading of the plate, and it tends to suck the oil back in, or screw the oil back in. It's pretty ingenious design. They did later go to regular seals like you might find in the front of the motor, or in normal more modern applications now. Now you got to essentially zero up that plate around the crankshaft. This is very important because the oil clearance between all of that stuff has got to be pretty tight. If it's not, the screw effect where it will drive the oil back into the motor is not going to work, and it would just leak out. So it's a pretty thin. You can see me trying to work it around there. It's a pretty thin feeler gauge. I think that was 0.002 inches. So it's you could tear this one pretty easily. So you got to be kind of careful. And again, I've got the nuts screwed in and snug, not real tight, so that I can get some movement when I take it with my my hammer there, just to make sure that it's going to go around. And I have a little problem consistently down there in that corner, what I'm fighting with right now, but eventually I get it to come around. So again, this was a lot of trial and error, moving the thing just a little bit, and it would throw off a little bit, and you just have to keep at it. Again, I got all the screws kind of snug tight here a little bit so that they don't flop around. It doesn't move too much. And then when I do adjust it with the soft blow hammer, it tends to stay, hopefully, where it is. And again, like I said, this is just a bunch of iterations here. Realize also quite obviously that I had to take the crank, or excuse me, the block back off of the engine stand to do this, since the engine stand mounts up back there. Still relatively light at this point. I would not probably be able to do this or even recommend doing it with the pistons in and the crank, or excuse me, the connecting rods in, but with the crank, just the crankshaft here, it wasn't too heavy at all. So I just keep fighting with this and try to get it zeroed up as best as I can. Alright, so I'm doing the last little bit of adjustment here to the rear oil seal, making sure it's centered up as much as I can, and then going back in, snugging all the bolts up. 7/16 I believe they are here. Taking the feeler gauge, again, pretty tight clearances, taking the feeler gauge and running it around to make sure I have a full 360 degrees worth of rotation around that, tighten it up a little bit more, and then I'll go back, check and make sure that I didn't make it crooked or take it off, twist it when tightening the bolts down. You want to keep this, like I said, as centered as possible. If you have a gap too far in one direction, the oil will tend to leak out instead of be drawn back into the motor. So again, I make sure that it's all good. I double check my torque there. 1.6 to 1.8 foot-pounds, I believe, is what the specification is. And get the torque wrench all set up and essentially go down to torquing them. You'll notice I'm kind of using a modified star pattern here. Using that star pattern there to try to make sure that I don't twist the rear main oil seal at all when I'm tightening it down. 1.6 to 1.8 foot-pounds, going around getting everything tight, and I'll do one final check of my clearances here once everything gets tight, and again going around in the star pattern, making sure that everything's nice and tight. No worries about aluminum or anything, unlike the front sealing block. This is more typical, more what you're used to seeing. So I have these tight. Eventually, doing a lot of checking here for some reason, but just making sure. Yep, get it tight. Spin it around a little bit, make sure I get freedom of movement there. And I pointed out the little brass bushing in the center there. I'd replace that. As a matter of course, again, that's where the transmission main shaft will fit in. So you want to make sure that that's a new bearing there if you can. And then the rear engine plate goes in. This is just tightened, just bolted in, generally bolted in. There was a torque spec on this. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Probably 1.5 to 20 foot-pounds or so. But this just gets tightened down. Again, I needed to put this on before I put the motor back on the stand, because I'm going to be using those rear mounts for the engine stand. So, and that was about it for this part of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll try to get the next video out soon. Cheers.